Happy Draftmas Eve, 12s. We are almost to the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft. How are things going to play out on Thursday through Saturday for not just the Seahawks, for the rest of the NFL? It's our annual prediction episode here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here for our Draftmas Eve Wednesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Delta, British Columbia, or Starksville, Mississippi. We appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The first round of the 2025 NFL Draft is just 24 hours away, a little bit under actually, and we will be covering every moment on Locked On Seahawks. And tonight, as we get into that Draftmas Eve spirit, we're going to have our annual predictions, and we're going to be revisiting the quarterback possibility for the Seahawks going into this draft, plus our burning questions heading into day one. Jam-packed episode brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Draftmas Eve episode of Locked On Seahawks. As we draw closer to the start of the 2025 NFL Draft, it is time to dish out our predictions, Rob. And we know that the draft is as unpredictable as anything. And yet this particular draft, as we've talked about a bunch the last month, 2 months, it feels like this draft may have the potential to be one of the most chaotic that we have seen in terms of how things are going to unfold, where players are going to fall. So let's talk predictions, what you're anticipating tomorrow night. And let's start from an NFL perspective rather than just the Seahawks, a potential domino that might have a ripple effect on who the Seahawks can pick at number 18 overall.
Yeah, I think that you have to start the conversation at the quarterback position. We certainly expect Cam Ward to be the number one overall pick to the Tennessee Titans, whether it be at number 3 overall or later. Daniel Jeremiah is projecting the New York Giants actually to trade with the Seattle Seahawks and have the Seahawks trade out of the first round entirely to take a quarterback. And that is one of the storylines I think that we have to be talking about here, not necessarily from a Seahawks perspective, but from an NFL and a quarterback perspective. I expect there to be 3 quarterbacks that are going to wind up going in the first round. Again, Cam Ward, number 1 overall. New York Giants, I think that they're going to be taking a quarterback, whether it be at number 3 with Shedeur Sanders, whether it be in trade up for Jackson Dart, as Daniel Jeremiah projected, whether it be a trade up for Shedeur Sanders. Those are the 3 quarterbacks that I think are going to be going in among the first 32 selections of the 2025 NFL Draft. In my opinion, the 3 most likely destinations for those quarterbacks are, again, Cam Ward with the Tennessee Titans at number 1 overall. I believe that Shedeur Sanders is a hand-in-glove fit for the New York Giants. Again, number 3 or in a trade down or in a trade up. I just think that Shedeur Sanders, because of his just familiarity with all of the hype and buzz, I think that he makes an awful lot of sense for the New York Giants. So somehow, some way, I think that Shedeur Sanders winds up being a member of the New York Giants. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, they don't have a second-round pick because they traded to the Seahawks, of course, for DK Metcalf. And this is a team that is desperate for a quarterback. So whether it be a Shedeur Sanders, whether it be a Jackson Dart, whoever, I don't care if Aaron Rodgers signs tonight. I do think the Pittsburgh Steelers, regardless of who they might bring in terms of veterans, the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be using number 21 overall selection on a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that that's certainly going to be the case, that those 3 are going to be in the first round. And we're going to have more to talk about that in our second segment from a Seahawks perspective. But this is what I'm anticipating. You mentioned the Giants possibly trading down. My prediction for tomorrow night, I think either the Cleveland Browns or the New York Giants are going to trade out of their top 3 pick. And Some may be wondering, why would you do that if you have an opportunity, if you're Cleveland, to draft Travis Hunter? Look, to me, there is not just smoke, there's fire when it comes to the rumors with the Cleveland Browns. And whether it's about paying a second-round pick because they've got all the money invested in Myles Garrett and obviously Deshaun Watson, that nightmare contract that they're still dealing with, or the fact that they've got holes littered all over the roster and they're just looking to get extra picks on day 2 or even maybe another day 1 selection in the future so they can try to build this team back up. Look, either them or the Giants. If the Giants are not sold on a quarterback and, maybe Abdul Carter falls to them at number 3 and you take him, you put him with that line with Brian Burns and Thibodeau, and you have a dynamic defensive line and Dexter Lawrence as well. Maybe you just double down there. But I could see the Giants saying, we want to get an extra pick on day 2 so that we can go get our QB later and then we can pick somebody else here in the first round. I think one of those 2 teams are going to trade down, and I think the teams to watch are the Jaguars and the Raiders at 5 and 6. I could see one of those teams. Jacksonville would be my prediction right now. I think Jacksonville is going to try to go up and get Travis Hunter. That's what I think is going to happen in this draft. And the other thing that I think from a league perspective, we've talked so much about Armand Membo and Kelvin Banks Jr. and Will Campbell. This is my bold prediction going into tomorrow night. I think Kelvin Banks Jr. is a top 6 pick in this draft. I think Will Campbell gets picked right before him by the New England Patriots, who need offensive line help badly. I think Kelvin Banks Jr., from everything I'm hearing, I think Kelvin Banks Jr. is the second tackle that comes off the board, not Armand Membo.
Well, that's a bold take because that's the player that I had the Seahawks selecting at number 18 overall. And frankly, I'm not sure that they would take him at number 18. In your final mock draft, of course, you had the Seahawks taking Donovan Ezraku, the edge rusher from Boston College, and I had them taking Kelvin Banks. And I do think that there's a good possibility that Seattle winds up going with a defensive player, even if Kelvin Banks is available, even if Gray Zabel is available, even if Tyler Booker is available. So to me, just to kind of pivot back to the Seahawks on this, opening segment here of draft predictions. Look, I think that the Seahawks may very well have all of the offensive line candidates that they are, or at least that we have been most excited about, actually be available to them at number 18 overall. And instead, John Schneider pivots and winds up taking a defensive player, maybe even a wide receiver at that number 18 overall section. Or as we mentioned before, Daniel Jeremiah projecting the Seahawks are going to trade out entirely of the first round. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that they are either going to stick and pick with an offensive lineman, as I just mentioned with Kelvin Banks, or with a defensive player. And again, to me, I just look at Kelvin Banks as being one of the very few offensive linemen that I expect to go in the first round that actually checks all of the boxes in terms of age, durability, positional versatility, level of competition, and just athletic ability. To me, he is one of the very few that actually checks all of the boxes that John Schneider has preferred in the past, and that's why I have him going to the Seahawks. But if he is going to be a top 6 selection, as you projected, isn't Daniel Jeremiah projected? He had the Las Vegas Raiders, Pete Carroll, taking Kelvin Banks number 6 overall. If that is indeed the case, I think that the Seahawks are naturally going to pivot to a defensive lineman or a defensive player of some type, but I think it'll be a defensive lineman, and then come back on day 2 in the second round, 50 and 52, or perhaps having a number of other picks if they were going to trade out at 18, that be able to take the offensive lineman at that point in the draft.
My Seahawks prediction, and this is something that I've fine-tuned a little bit just because of today's news, that Cameron Young has been waived. And my understanding, it's related to his health. Did not play in all but one game last year because of knee issues. They waived him today. You haven't re-signed Jonathan Hankins. That nose tackle position is a crucial spot that needs to be filled. My prediction is Seattle picks a nose tackle candidate in their first 3 selections in this draft. It's going to be with that first rounder or one of their second rounders. And in my last mock draft, I didn't have that. But again, this is changing information. This stuff is always fluid. I think Seattle is going to get a massive DT that can play the nose role and also has some pass rushing ability to add to this really good line and make it a great defensive line. So that is my prediction going into the next couple days of the draft. When we come back, Rob and I are going to talk quarterback specifically. It's been a topic of discussion earlier in the draft process, but there might be a few things that we haven't talked about to this point from a quarterback perspective that are worth revisiting here as we head into tomorrow's first round of the 2025 NFL Draft. We'll get to that coming up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The NBA playoffs are officially underway, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team, in this case, the Warriors, hoping to go up 2-0 against the Rockets, or diving into player props. From Steph Curry three-pointers to Jimmy Butler steals, to assist, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Happy Draftmas Eve to all of our listeners. I'm Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thanks as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As we head towards tomorrow night's first round of the 2025 NFL Draft in Green Bay, there's kind of been a general consensus since Drew Lock was re-signed to go with Sam Howell and Sam Darnold. Of course, Jaron Hall's also on the roster, that Lock coming back to town makes it a far-fetched scenario, or maybe an improbable, unlikely, however what word you want to use it, that the Seahawks are going to be using one of their 10 picks on a quarterback. But Rob, you and I, we've kind of been hinting at this a little bit over the last week, and I think Sam Howell's already got both feet out the door. I would not be shocked if he's getting traded during this draft, to be honest with you. There's already teams that have called the Seahawks. John Schneider acknowledged that on Monday. They're going to be moving on from him most likely. He's a young quarterback. Somebody's going to be willing to offer a conditional pick probably in 2026, and you're going to move on. Drew Lock's on a 2-year deal, $2.5 million in guarantees, but if the right QB is there and the board falls your way, which it has not up to this point very often for the Seahawks, 2 quarterbacks picked in 18 years, I do think that this is a fascinating draft from the perspective that you have to look at value. This is not a great quarterback class, and yet, if the board falls a certain way, maybe Seattle at pick 18 entertains the idea of picking a quarterback. And I'm just going to throw this out there, Rob. Shedeur Sanders, if he falls to number 18, the idea has been, well, now you've got a pick that you can mortgage off and somebody can give you a bunch of picks and they can trade up for him. But what if John Schneider likes Shedeur Sanders? We don't know. You and I don't know necessarily if that's a fit, but that is a scenario we haven't really discussed to this point. And he does have a lot of traits that would fit with Clint Kubiak's offense. Whether you're a fan of the Sanders family or not, he's got a lot of those traits that you're looking for as a timing-based, accurate quarterback that gets the football out to his receivers.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that he is a nice schematic fit into Clint Kubiak's offense. Look, I mean, Clint Kubiak's offense is not complicated. It is all about anticipation and accuracy. And in those areas, Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback in this draft class. That's why he has been my top-rated quarterback this entire time. He does not have the highest upside. That's why Cam Ward is going to be the number 1 overall selection. But Shedeur Sanders has the highest floor of this quarterback class. I mean, he was a guy that, led the entire country in completion percentage this past season at 74%. Pete Carroll and John Schneider used to talk about how they had hoped that Russell Wilson or Geno Smith might get to, north of 70%. And then there's no question about that. A lot of the Shedeur Sanders passes were, underneath throws. But at the same time, again, when you look at a West Coast offense, a lot of their throws are underneath passes, quick crossers, quick screens, things of that nature. Shedeur Sanders' ability to read the defense at the line of scrimmage, and he has been playing a pro-style offense, unlike Cam Ward, unlike Jackson Dart, unlike Jaylen Milro, unlike a lot of the quarterbacks that we're going to be talking about here. Shedeur Sanders was under the tutelage of Pat Shurmur, who was a 3-time NFL head coach. So again, while Deion Sanders gets all of the talk when we're talking about Shedeur Sanders, I do think that Shedeur Sanders has the most important traits to project to be a successful quarterback in the NFL. And when you have a quarterback like a Sam Darnold ahead of him, then you are going to be able to allow a young quarterback to, just learn from the sidelines. And if you are among those, and there's a lot of them, that believe that Shedeur Sanders needs a little bit of humble pie, where better to get it than a place like Seattle, where it has a relatively small media market. At least they don't come out there with the razors that we see in some of the other cities across the country, where they're just, screaming at their general manager, at their head coach to get the young quarterback onto the field. I think that John Schneider deserves a little bit of respect in terms of how he has worked the quarterback position before, and that Sam Darnold certainly deserves the opportunity to be the starter that he was signed to be. So again, I think that Shedeur Sanders would be a really intriguing fit for the Seahawks. I don't think that it's likely that is what is going to happen. Yeah. But if Shedeur Sanders was selected by the Seahawks, I wouldn't bat an eye, because I think that this is an investment in the future of the franchise, and that is the most important thing that John Schneider and the Seahawks could possibly do tomorrow.
I still think that the sweet spot here, and this is there's two sweet spots for me. Because the Seahawks have already met with Jaylen Milro and just the athletic traits that are off the charts and the big arm. And as we've talked about, I've got a 4th-round grade on him right now because I have a lot of concerns with him from a quarterback perspective, with a lot of the things that are away from just the physical tools, the reading the defense, the short to intermediate accuracy, his lack of pocket presence a lot of the time. And there are things that I've brought up numerous times. However, when you listen to Jaylen Milro talk in interviews, and I've had a chance to sit down and listen to some of these recent interviews, that kid is easy to root for, and you can tell he's got a really high football IQ. That's the kind of player that you can bring in. And I'm going to throw this out there. I'm not saying he's the same player, but Josh Allen from the Bills is one of the few quarterbacks that I've seen that had accuracy issues in college that went to the NFL and became an accurate quarterback. And I think one of the things that really helped him is he's got that high football IQ and he's got the work ethic. Jaylen Milro's got both those things. And Milro is a more dynamic athlete than what Josh Allen. Now, Allen's a bigger guy. He's a different style runner. But I can see John Schneider, if the board falls to him at 50 or 52 and Jaylen Milro has not been picked at that point, and I'll be surprised, actually, because there's a lot of teams that are interested in him. If he is there at 50 or 52, that might be where that board finally fell Seattle's way, and John Schneider says, look, this is a guy that can be my 3rd quarterback, and I can keep him active because we can put packages to get his running ability on the field. You can't say that about a lot of the quarterbacks. In fact, I wouldn't say any of the other QBs in this class you're going to be doing that with. But Jaylen Milro is the one you can do it. I would still say, aside from that, though, that clearly day 3 to me is the sweet spot where they might have somebody that falls in their lap that they're interested in.
Well, I think that day 3 is the most logical spot. I didn't have the Seahawks taking a quarterback in my final, 10 pick selection mock draft. But at the same time, I certainly have talked a lot about the quarterback possibilities, and I think that anytime you have an athlete like a Jaylen Milro, then you have to consider him. Because if you hit on him, I love the fact that you mentioned Josh Allen. I remember having conversations with scouts, general managers, even, prior to, I think it was a 2018 draft when Josh Allen was selected, and there was some talk with Baker Mayfield, number 1 overall. Well, then why not take the quarterback that if you hit on him, then you've got an absolute MVP candidate. And obviously Josh Allen, as the current reigning MVP, just kind of proved that point there. That's the thing about Jaylen Milro. Obviously, he is a player that needs some polishing here. But if you hit on him, then you have an MVP caliber kind of a prospect. He needs time. But at the same time, you also see the accuracy on the deep ball. You see the straight line speed, his compact build. I love the fact that you mentioned the intangibles. This is an intelligent quarterback. This is a quarterback that has great leadership ability. The people in Tuscaloosa absolutely love Jaylen Milro. And in terms of his leadership ability, not just the athletic traits. That's why when I've used the comparison to Michael Vick, and I think physically speaking, they are very similar. But Michael Vick, that was one of the questions that people had about him, was the intangibles. That is not the question with Jaylen Milro. He is absolutely off the charts in those areas. So again, very excited about the possibility of him. But that, again, to me, like Shedeur Sanders, feels like a little bit of a, could happen, but I don't think it's likely to happen. I'll tell you the 3 quarterbacks that I'm most intrigued by for the Seahawks. Now, we've talked before about Tyler Shough. I just think that he is a guy that could be able to come in and play immediately. And I think that that's going to be intriguing to the Seahawks. The durability questions aside, he is a quarterback that I think that his maturity, his accuracy from the pocket, his size, I think would be very intriguing to the Seahawks. And then finally, I think that John Schneider, my conversations with him and with other people with the Seahawks over the years, I just think that they love the clutch factor of certain quarterbacks. That was certainly one of the things that we saw with Russell Wilson in the past. I think that Will Howard from Ohio State, Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, to me, both have a clutch factor. Jaylen Milro has that boosted a little bit as well. But to me, Will Howard from Ohio State and Dylan Gabriel absolutely check boxes in that regard. I don't know that either one of them really should be selected on day 2. I think that both of them are going to wind up being selected on day 2. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it winds up being the Seahawks that actually do that selection.
And I'm going to still say, if you're looking for somebody that you can potentially redshirt because he's coming off the ACL injury, Curtis Rourke, I see a lot of Kirk Cousins in his game. I see that quick thinker, quick release, accurate. Up until the last few games last season was not taking very many sacks, and the O-line just imploded the last couple of weeks. But he is a guy that gets the football out quickly. He doesn't turn the ball over, just 5 interceptions last year. He would have gone much earlier if not for having surgery on his knee. And the fact of the matter is, there's video out there of him throwing and moving pretty well already. If I'm the Seahawks and he's there in the 7th round with one of those 2 7th rounders, I picked it in my mock draft. I just think that he's a guy you can store him for a year if he's not healthy. And that eliminates some of your quarterback controversy, but he can still compete down the line, especially if Sam Darnold doesn't deliver the way that you hope he's going to. So I think that there's definitely some names on day 3 that would make some sense. We'll see. But end of the day, in 7th round, I picked Rourke. I still think it's probably unlikely before then, or maybe the 5th round they would take a QB. But with the addition of Drew Lock, I still think it makes it a lot more unlikely that they are going to do that. When we come back, the quarterback question was the first one we had to tackle. We are going to dive into some other burning questions for the Seahawks coming into this draft process as we continue our Draftmas Eve episode here of Locked On Seahawks. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices, no console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning-fast speeds that you need to stay competitive. And with affordable and portable gaming, you can play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. If you already have a console, a Fire TV Stick 4K device allows you to travel easier, taking your games or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/FireTV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Welcome back to our Draftmas Eve episode of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all of the valued 12s out there that are tuning in. Thanks, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen all 5 days of the week. We greatly appreciate it. We just talked quarterbacks. That was really a big burning question heading into this draft for John Schneider and the Seahawks, an ever critical one after trading Geno Smith and DK Metcalf this offseason. They're coming off a 10-win campaign. The organization still very much believes that they are trending in the right direction to be back in contention, but to do that, they need to hit the ball out of the park here in this draft. And Rob, the Seahawks are the only team that have 5 picks in the first 96 selections. There's no other team that has more than 4. And so this really is a prime opportunity for the Seahawks. To me, when we're talking burning questions here, I mentioned this earlier with the release, the wave of Cameron Young, who unfortunately it sounds like health is just going to prevent him from being able to make the impact the Seahawks hoped that he would when they drafted him in the 4th round 2 years ago. But the nose tackle spot, generally speaking, has been a position the last 10, 12 years where the value, if you can't rush the passer, guys that used to be first-round picks as big run stuffers, they're not going till the middle of the draft, early to mid day 3. But in this particular class, you've got a number of guys that are big body nose tackles that can rush the passer. And that's part of what makes it such a special group of defensive linemen. So I guess my burning question is, just how important is it for the Seahawks to prioritize that nose tackle spot now that Jonathan Hankins and Young are both gone? At least in the case of Hankins, has not been re-signed to this point.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, because I think that you could make an argument that if nose guard is that important to the Seahawks, then maybe Kenneth Grant at number 18 overall would be your selection there. I would be surprised to see Grant go any earlier than that. But his size, the power, his ability to get his hands up at the line of scrimmage, he not only is a better pass rusher than you normally see as a nose guard, he also, again, gets his hands up and knocks passes down. There feels like there is a great deal of upside with him. And obviously the familiarity that Mike McDonald would have with Kenneth Grant, formerly, having working with him at the University of Michigan, Jay Harbaugh as well. And so, again, I think that makes some sense. I also think there's a possibility that the Seahawks view that nose guard position as a little bit of a specialist. And that's why they might be willing to just kind of wait a little bit longer at that spot. And rather than taking a Kenneth Grant or a Derek Harmon in the first round, maybe wait until the mid rounds with a Jay To'ia as a player that I've mentioned many times before. So being a guy that I just think is a little bit more of a pure run stuffer at 6'2", 340 pounds, but at the same time, he's got 3 sacks, 1 sack per year over the past 3 seasons. That to me is more the traditional nose guard spot. I think that nose guard is a fascinating position for the Seahawks, Corbin. But to me, wide receiver is the one that I really have some burning questions about. As I've talked about basically ad nauseum, this is a wide receiver class that I think has some talent, and the Seahawks lack speed at the receiver position. So to me, is how early are they willing to draft a wide receiver that has the ability to create yardage after the catch, something that the Seahawks lacked a year ago, even when they had dynamic athletes like DK Metcalf and, a former all-pro kick returner in Tyler Lockett. So are you willing to invest number 18 overall? I think that it's very possible that Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona, that Matthew Golden from Texas are off the board. I've kind of been pounding the table here for a guy like a Luther Bird. I think that makes a lot of sense for a guy like a Emeka Egbuka. To me, those are the 4 wide receivers that should go in the first round. So do you wait for day 2 with a guy like a Jalen Royals, for example, or the 2 Iowa State wide receivers, Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins? I think, again, that is a positional group that I think that the Seahawks have to take advantage of. And I'll just make another bold prediction, as we talked about before. A wide receiver will be one of Seattle's first 3 selections in this year's draft class. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they select as many wide receivers as they do offensive linemen, much to the chagrin of some Seahawks fans out there.
And that really leads into the next burning question for me. How many picks is John Schneider going to actually invest in that offensive line? And we've talked about this a lot the last couple of months, and I'd say pretty much every mock draft that I have done in this pre-draft cycle, I've had no more than 2 offensive linemen that have been selected. And that to me is about what I'm expecting here. Now, if you end up in a situation where, say, Jared Wilson, the center out of Georgia, who to me is the best center, if you're not counting Gray Zabel in there, if Jared Wilson falls into the 82 to 92 range and you've already taken a guard earlier, I could see Seattle saying, you know what, at this point from a value perspective, Jared Wilson's the best player on the board. Let's go get us a center that can fit into this scheme. And then maybe you pick a backup tackle or another guard later in the draft. But to me, 2, and it might even be just 1. That's not what fans want to hear, but Josh Jones was signed to be the swing tackle. I wouldn't be shocked if they go through this entire draft without taking a tackle. And you get your guard on day 2. That to me is the sweet spot, particularly the second round. You get your guard, and if you're convinced that Oluwatimi or Jalen Sundell is your guy at center, they may very well decide to punt on the center position because it is not a good position in this draft. So maybe they double up on guards. Maybe they'll go with a guard and a center, maybe somebody that's a hybrid like an Addison West on day 3 that you can try to develop and see if he can be a guy for you. But I just think that is really the cutoff there to me. Maybe they pick 3 if the board falls a certain way, but they've invested so many picks in that offensive line, and there's been so much push about trying to develop the guys they have drafted the last couple of years with a new coaching staff. I don't see John Schneider going out and saying, you know what, I'm going to use 3 or 4 picks on my offensive line. They're not going to do that.
They are not going to do that. And, you kind of start to go down that road as far as like how many draft picks will the Seahawks use? And I thought that you were going to stop right there rather than just focusing specifically on offensive linemen. That's why I mentioned, Daniel Jeremiah, a moment ago. I mean, in his final mock draft, he has the New York Giants trading all the way up from number 33 overall to number 18, and the Seahawks trading completely out of the first round. And with 10 selections already, that is one of the reasons why I kind of scoff at that idea. Look, John Schneider, I love the idea of John Schneider having a dozen or more selections in the draft class that I think is a little bit being underrated at this point. Again, I'll use a line that I've heard Daniel Jeremiah use, that this is a class that has a lot of starters, not a lot of stars. I agree with that. At the same time, I also think that the Seahawks are a playoff contender as they stand right now. I don't think that they need more players. I think they need better players at a certain number of key positions. So if they were to trade back and let's say have 12 or 13 draft selections, I think then you turn around and you trade right back up and you use some of that ammunition and you kind of, just cherry pick the players that you like at certain positions of concern. And of course, that being offensive line, as I mentioned before, wide receiver. I also think that the front 7 on defense is a critical area of concern for this club, both in terms of nose guard as well as edge rusher. And then cornerback is a position of concern. To me, those are the 5 positions that you absolutely have to address in this class. And if you have some extra picks available to take a young offensive tackle, a young running back, a young tight end, hey, that's great. But I think that you have to check boxes at those positions first before you worry about anything else.
And that was a perfect segue into my last burning question going into this draft. Is this the year that John Schneider trades up in the first round or trades back into the first round for the first time? He has never done either one of those things in his 15 prior seasons as the general manager of the Seahawks. But this is where that argument of quality versus quantity really comes into play, because the Seahawks do have all of this ammunition on day 2. If there is a guy at the end of the first round that still remains available that you are just saying, look, I would have considered this guy at 18. Do you decide to say, you know what, we're gonna trade away a second and one of our thirds here, and we are going to go up and we're going to get this player that we think has more value than picking 2 good players. Let's go get a great player. I'm wondering if that could happen. And I'm going to throw out a wild card for this. We talked quarterbacks earlier. I don't think this happens because Pittsburgh, if Jackson Dart's available, I think Pittsburgh's going to take him at 21. But let's say that Shedeur Sanders falls all the way to 21 and Pittsburgh takes him. You have an opportunity then, if you're John Schneider, to say, you know what, I can trade back in and go get a QB here and still have made another first round pick. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that is one of those scenarios that you have to be prepared for when you go into the draft process. Maybe you have somebody like Donovan Jackson that you love that might not make it to the beginning of the second round. You go get him. You go get that offensive lineman after you've used your first pick in the first round somewhere else. Maybe you get an edge or a defensive tackle or a receiver. I just think that you've got to have the willingness to do that when you have that much ammunition. As you're saying, with 10 picks, that's great, but maybe coming out of this draft with 7 or 8 selections that are better players is the way to go to really get you back over the hump and competing for titles in the NFC.
Yeah, and just real quickly, as far as trades, I think that's something that, we're all going to be fascinated to see the trades. I don't think that there's going to be as many trades as what we've seen in recent years. Again, I think that this is a draft class that has an awful lot of starters, awful lot of players are going to be drafted on day 2, early day 3, that the teams are going to have a great deal of value on, and they're not going to be eager to trade those types of selections. That said, I do think that the Atlanta Falcons, who have 5 picks, the Minnesota Vikings, who have 4 picks, sorry about that, are going to be 2 teams that potentially could be looking to trade back. Of course, the Atlanta Falcons select earlier than Seattle. I believe that they're at number 15 overall.
Yep.
The Minnesota Vikings, I believe, are right at what?
24th.
24th overall. So again, you have a team ahead of Seattle, a team behind Seattle, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if there are some teams that are willing to trade some of their veteran players. Trey Hendrickson, the edge rusher from the Cincinnati Bengals, he could get moved. Jalen Ramsey, the cornerback, of course, for the Miami Dolphins, he could get moved. Wouldn't be surprised if it's veterans that are getting traded rather than teams looking to move up to select a rookie prospect.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I will be hosting a post-first round extra podcast tomorrow. That'll be our Thursday show. Maybe the Seahawks make 2 selections tomorrow night. We'll have to wait and see, but going to have all the details, all the information coming out of the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft that will be coming to you live from the VMAC tomorrow after the conclusion of the first round. Make sure that you listen in, and happy Draftmas Eve to all the 12s. Go Hawks.